it's really important at this time when we are facing so much external stress that we understand what stress is in ourselves. We need to recognize it, and then we need to take steps to reduce it. So I thought I would just have a little talk about what stress is exactly. Well, there are two kinds of stress, medically speaking. There's acute stress and there's chronic stress. So I'm going to talk first of all about acute stress. What do I mean by acute stress? Well, being acutely stressed is that sort of situation that any of us can find ourselves in. For example, we might be taking a driving test in a week's time, and we're busy preparing for it. And as it's getting closer and closer to the day, we notice ourselves getting anxious. We can feel our heart beating every time we think of going to the driving instructor school. And those would be normal symptoms of acute stress. Acute stress is an awareness that you're not relaxed. It's an awareness that your nervous system is switched on, and you notice that through the heart beating, through feelings of anxiety. You might even have physical feelings, physical symptoms. For example, we might have a gastric upset, we might be a bit nauseous, or we might have some diarrhea, or just abdominal upset. We also don't sleep very well when we're acutely stressed, but all of it has a very recognizable cause. So most of us don't worry too much about it. And what happens is that once the cause of it is removed, once we've had our driving test and we've passed it and we're celebrating, everything settles down and we're back to normal again. Our digestion returns to normal, we're sleeping well, and we're glad it's all over. So that is a very normal part of everyday life. We are designed to respond to stress, and we're designed to get over it. So that's not a problem. So let's have a look at what is a problem for us. And I mean a problem in that it leads to medical illness. So let's talk about chronic stress. What is chronic stress? Chronic stress is the sort of stress that is repeated. It doesn't have to be there all the time, but if it's there on a regular basis, like every day you're driving to work through heavy traffic, you've got to drive an hour on the motorway, and you're stressed by that, the day starts like that. Then you get to the office and you have 100 emails to answer, and you've got a secretary constantly interrupting you, and then you have a stressful meeting ahead at lunchtime, and so on. If you have that kind of lifestyle, you know already, just as I'm talking, that that's going to have your nervous system switched on all the time. Our nervous systems are designed to switch on to deal with a situation, but they're not meant to be switched on constantly or regularly or all the time. And if they are, then we start getting into trouble. In fact, what research on stress has shown, in fact, this is a study that came out in 2019, that the biggest causes of chronic stress are uncertainty, lack of information, conflict, and lack of connection and social support. There are a few others. But what interests me on those parameters, those four things, is that this is exactly what we're all facing in lockdown. We're uncertain about how long it's going to go on for. The parameters keep changing. The information keeps changing. We don't know what's happening. There's a lot of conflict between people who wants the vaccine and who doesn't want the vaccine, creates conflict in families. And of course, the actual parameters that we have to follow by law, by the way. The other day I went to IKEA and was told over the tannoy it's illegal not to wear a mask. So this has now become law, that we are now cut off from our social connection. And it's this disconnection from social support and social connection that for us as humans, it's unnatural for us. It's very stressful. And of course, this is so-called by law. So we are, through lockdown, living in a chronically stressed environment, all of us. You're very, very lucky if you're able to escape from this. Many of my patients who come to me these days, and I'm seeing more and more, very stressed people in crisis, people who've had a teenager who's suicidal, people who know of university students who've actually committed suicide because they can't take it anymore. Their nervous systems are very fragile, and they're in danger under chronic stress. So yes, we're living at a time of chronic stress, On the planet, every country is facing the same quandrum, and I really want to make you aware of what it is. So what happens with chronic stress? Our nervous systems go into overdrive. So we're either chronically anxious, it's called being in fight and flight all the time. We're either chronically anxious or angry, uh, or if it gets too overwhelming, we then just simply cut off. It's called freeze, when the nervous system just simply cuts off and it says, I've had enough. And what we then find is that we become disconnected from our feelings. We're no longer feeling anything. We're still working intellectually. The brain doesn't cut off, it's the emotions that cut off. And what happens in the state of freeze is that we become a bit numbed out. We're less interested in what's going on. We might become a bit foggy. And eventually, what this leads to medically is chronic fatigue. You've heard of chronic fatigue syndrome. Chronic fatigue, depression is a very likely outcome of this when it's not resolved. The nervous system cannot stay in a switched on state indefinitely without producing very serious problems. So I hope that this has provided a baseline of understanding of what stress is in the acute and in the chronic states. And my feeling is that at this time on the planet, many, many people are suffering